What does your left ink say? I'm trying to read it. Your left ink on your left arm, your upper arm, right there.
Oh, this machine.
That one says, "This machine kills fascists."
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's got the heart with the.
Work in
Awesome.
progress.
How many do you have a count of how many how much ink you have on you?
Not exactly. I mean, I've got ankle tattoos. I've got big whole torso thing, and then the sleeve is in progress. So.
Wow. And what's your motivation for tattoo? Because everybody has a different reason. Was there a reason why you decided to do it?
Well, initially, like the big torso piece was like this kind of misguided attempt at like, well, if I get this great big masculine tattoo, I surely can stop myself from transitioning, right? Yeah, it didn't work out that way.
Sort of like a beard that's permanent, a permanent beard.
Yeah, pretty much. But no, since then it's been like very much a sort of like getting the tattoo since then. It's kind of like doing martial arts or exercise or anything. It's sort of a reclamation of my body kind of thing, you know. So
I had a feeling you were going to go there. Everyone has their own thing, and that's awesome. That's awesome. So I'm going to just confirm some things. Carly said you were 38. Are you still 38? Will you be 38 next week?
38. I will be 38 until next June.
June, a pride baby. All right.
Yeah, June 26th, which is actually when marriage
equality, and also a couple other Supreme Court decisions. That's pretty awesome. Your pronouns?
She, her.
Same here. And do you identify as transgender, or is there another word that you use for yourself?
Transgender, trans, whatever, you know. Yeah.
I've met some people who call themselves trans non-binary. I have people who've called themselves just non-binary, and then genderqueer and all those other things. And did you want to disclose your orientation? Because it's not really my business, but if it's something you want people to know, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm pretty open. It's yeah, it just comes down to the individual. Bisexual, pansexual, whatever. I'm not too picky about the label.
That's cool. And are you seeing anyone at the moment? Is there someone special in your life?
No.
Huh.
Just I have a little cat.
And their cat's name is what?
Lufa. She's terrible.
Mufa. Oh, Lufa. I love the pictures with you and Mufa. I love them. Love them. Love them. So let's talk a little bit about transition, because Carly shared the story in Outsports and on the podcast back in July of your difficult teenage years, and that certainly seemed like a struggle, and how it was leaving the Army in 2010, 11 years ago, that really sort of was the spark. So tell us a little bit about that transition. How did that go? And was there anyone who was helping you at that time?
Well, first off, getting out of the Army wasn't really the spark. Like, going into the Army was sort of a postponement of everything, you know. I had played with the idea of transition all the way back in high school in the 90s. I had a few abortive attempts at transition, like, that just didn't work out. You know, even when I was in the Army, I was on and off of hormones sometimes. So yeah, and as far as like having any help, just people online. There used to be a forum that I used to go on, and I think it's still around, but I haven't been on there in years. Yeah. It was a pretty isolated time, you know. Like most of the support I had was from friends in high school and college.
I officially came out in 2013, and there weren't really a lot of people except YouTube people to really, you know, point to. YouTube was like a savior for me. Finding people who, and Facebook, because I'm old, finding people who had, you know, done what I wanted to do and blazed a trail. And I'm wondering if, have you ever got a chance to meet any of those people you've seen on either YouTube or Facebook or some social media? Have you been able to meet them in person in real life?
No. I mean, some of the people that I knew from the forums were still in touch. You know, one of the ladies from the forums actually is the one that connected me with my surgeon and everybody. So that was really cool. But no, when it comes to like, you know, trans celebrities, you know, like YouTubers and all that, like, I've seen Laverne Cox in person because she came to my school to do a talk, my
Wow.
second time in college after I was out of the army. So like had like a Q&A with her once, but like that's the extent of it.
And were you out at that time?
Yeah, this was this was post. I mean, this was probably like in 2013, 2014 when that happened.
How cool is that? That's great. Yeah, I got to meet Laverne twice, once before I officially came out and once after. And, of course, obviously, I didn't make a big deal about having met her different ways, but an amazing person and inspirational. And now you're a trans celebrity.
That's still sinking in. I mean, I've been like a Z list internet celebrity for a while, like Tumblr stuff, but this is a little bit beyond that. I was actually recognized in public the other day, which was a little jarring.
Wow. Was it
But
positive?
yeah, it was just, I was eating with a friend and somebody like stopped their car in the middle of the street to like yell out their window like Alana. And that was it
Wow.
was I don't know how much that's going to be the new normal, because honestly, like, mixed martial arts isn't that big a deal to most people. So
The average person maybe, but in
yeah.
those circles, it's really big. And in those circles, you are well known. And, we've talked about this
Well, the mixed
privately.
martial arts circle and the trans circle, there's very little overlap right now.
The Venn
That was
diagram doesn't really overlap exactly. And some of the people in the MMA world are targeting you. How do you deal with that?
yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, when it comes to mixed martial arts, like, I know that is a primarily right wing and reactionary space, and I knew what I was getting into going into it. So I don't know. I mean, I was a little surprised by some of the people that weighed in, but also, like, they say the same things that every reactionary says, that, like, they don't know anything about trans lives or experience. They don't know anything about what HRT does, or if they do, they act like they don't.
Yeah.
So I mean, when
Yeah.
they say like the same half dozen things over and over, it's pretty easy to tune out.
The old she cut her dick off, or he, using the wrong
Yeah,
pronouns.
they'll misgender you and try to say that HRT doesn't do anything, but then when I'm like, well, I'll fight anybody that goes on estrogen for 6 months and drops to 145, and then silence.
I often say that if you put a cis het man on the hormone regimen that we go through, he would die. He would just not be able to handle it. Whereas for a
Oh
trans
God.
woman, it's like liberation.
Yeah.
Talk to me about Fallon. I am so thrilled that she was literally in your corner, even though she was backstage. And how did you two find each other?
Well, we've known each other online for years, going back at least to like 2013, 2014. Like, I was following her career back then. And I think, I had initially reached out to her on Facebook or something, because at the time I was working, I was doing a lot of metalwork. I was still completing my art degree, working on sculpture and metalwork. And I wanted to make her a sword. And I offered to make her a sword, and she accepted, and I never got around to it. Um, it was pretty tumultuous back then. So I still owe Fallon a sword.
Wow, you owe Fallon a Fox's sword. Do you
I
know
owe
what kind of
Fallon.
sword you were thinking about? Because obviously this is a
It
pretty
was
big
going to be
deal.
up to her. It was going to be up to her, and I think that was the thing. I think she wanted like a Japanese styled sword, and that's not. I haven't done that style, and I wanted to do it justice, and that's part of why I never got around to it, is because I
Ah,
haven't worked on that specific style of forging. I haven't done any tamahagane. I haven't like hammered out from iron ore. Like, it's a very long, complicated, involved process, and I'd want to do it justice if I were going to do it at all.
all right.
So,
Well, Shogun, when the Shogun episode comes up, please let me know. I want to hear all about it.
okay.
This is something that I think all of us, even those who aren't in MMA, understand, is that this is our life. And for other people looking in, it's either pretend or it's make believe or it's some kind of act. Tell me what it is about being trans that makes you happy. What's your joy? Where do you find your joy in being trans?
Um, that's kind of hard to articulate for me, honestly. I used to, and I feel like this is probably a fairly common experience, or at least for trans women of like my age and older. I used to like really hate it. I was like, oh, why couldn't I have been cis? Like, this sucks. This is horrible. I hate it. But honestly, I feel like being trans made me a better person because realistically, my politics were terrible growing up. Like, it was just the default was if you're growing up in South Carolina, everyone's a Republican. You don't hear other voices. If, like, yeah. And now, like, finding myself the very specific target of a lot of attacks from the right, and just like my experience in the military, my experience like as a trans woman afterwards, like it made me a better person because I kind of broke free of a lot of that propaganda and realized that, like, well, how to be a good person, frankly. Yeah, I mean, if I weren't trans, I could have ended up just another reactionary going to church 5 times a week in South Carolina.
Your story matches mine, except I'm from Long Island, and
Mm.
everyone on Long Island is Republican. And I had the same conservative views. I was a homophobe, but I was also closeted because I was afraid of all those boys who called me a fairy and fag and all those terrible words when I was little, thinking that, I don't want to be gay because that's what people hate. And
Yeah.
thinking I can't be a girl because it's not possible, even though I know I am. And the funny thing is that I felt exactly like you. I hated every idea, every aspect of transitioning. I did not want to go through with it. I needed somebody to push me.
Well, it wasn't that I hated the idea of transition, and I didn't hate transness. I didn't hate queerness. I
Mm-hmm.
hated, uh, I felt persecuted. It was like, well, why does this have to happen to me?
Right. Why is it you? Yeah.
Why couldn't I have been a normal girl? Like that kind of thing.
Sure.
But,
Sure.
yeah.
Do you have a plan right now? Like, what's next for you? What's on the agenda?
Well, I decided after the fight that I was going to take at least 2 weeks to just kind of relax and eat what I want and not train and just, chill. And I've done that. And now we're starting week 3. And I was going to try and get back in the gym this week, but my right hamstring's still giving me a little trouble. And so I'm probably going to keep relaxing that. And I've actually got to go to a friend's graduation in Massachusetts next week after. Anyway, so it's probably going to be another like 2 weeks before I get back in the gym.
Okay.
But I do want to. I'm going to get back in the gym, back training, and I'm looking for another fight. As many as I can get while I'm young enough to do it.
Have you heard from your opponent? Have you communicated with them post-fight?
Celine, I talked to the day after the fight at breakfast in the hotel down there in the COVID bubble. And I've sent her a message or two on Instagram. So yeah, we've chatted a little bit, not a lot, just kind of touch base. But
I thought
yeah,
it was very classy how you handled it, basically saying to the haters that you weren't just bashing you were bashing Celine.
Well, yeah, they are. I mean, when you break down their arguments, the things that they're saying, it's so often it's framed as like, oh, this big scary man just beat up this helpless little girl. And like literally, like I've got screen caps of some of the threats and things that I've received, and they're literally calling her a little girl. And I'm like, she's 6 inches taller than me. She is a very accomplished fighter.
That first round was pretty tough too. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really tough. But I mean, they have an answer for everything, and I'm just actually a terrible fighter. And the only reason I won is because of my inherent man bones kept me from getting knocked out or something. They've always got another bullshit argument.
Do you have thoughts on those people who are prominent in the anti-trans inclusion community, like Martina Navratilova? I wrote about her this morning. Those people who think that trans athletes shouldn't compete with cisgender athletes.
I mean, here's the thing. I don't know most of those people's names because I go out of my way to avoid them. And again, their arguments it's always the same stuff, just the same like half dozen things. And if you actually try to make any of them stand up to scientific scrutiny, they can't. So they'll trot out the same examples that they have. They'll trot out another detransitioner, and it always, like, you scratch the surface and it's always just like virulent transphobia. It's not, they don't actually care about women's sports. They don't actually care about, like, they don't think, they're not trying to protect anything. They're just trying to exclude trans women. The same people that say, well, maybe we could let trans people in sports, but not combat sports. Maybe, we could even let trans people in combat sports, but not Alana because she transitioned too late. But also, we should not let trans kids take puberty blockers. Like, make them transition late, make them transition too late so they can be excluded from public life. Like, that's what it comes down to, is they just want to exclude trans people from public life in any way that they can.
And the thing about puberty blockers, I mean, could you imagine if you had puberty blockers when you were young, or if I had them? I mean, they're reversible. They actually pause puberty. They don't cause any harm.
Yeah. No, I wanted them. I didn't know that I could have, if I'd realized that I could have found them online, I would have taken them. But I didn't realize I could find hormones and puberty blockers online until I had already joined the Army.
Wow. So speaking of the Army, just on an off topic, do you have any thoughts about what happened in Afghanistan, having served there?
I do, and it's not a popular opinion, but I think the war was won in the first 48 hours, and then we spent 20 years making contractors rich. All we did was, we did a lot of harm. Being in Afghanistan is one of the things that shifted my politics far left. Like, I'm anti-imperialism, I'm anti-capitalism, and Afghanistan was a place where those two things met and held hands and made out. We did a lot more bad over there than good.
And you were there. You were there.
As
So
soon as people start talking about things like acceptable levels of civilian casualties, they've lost the plot.
Yeah. So it's probably a good thing that we got out, but I guess it was a bit messy.
It was always going to be messy. I mean, we entrenched ourselves over there. Like, corporate interests with money to make entrenched themselves over there. And it's, I'm.
Well, why is it nobody talks about that stuff? I'm glad you're talking about it.
Well,
how come most people don't?
Well, look who pulls the purse strings. Look who has the money and the influence. I mean, you look at the New York Times this morning. They're putting out a bunch of propaganda that's like really pro cop. Talking about like, violence has risen because of the George Floyd protests, and cops aren't getting enough funding. And it's like they're armies right now. They're literally, like, they're driving around in the same anti-tank vehicles I had in Afghanistan. They don't need more funding. And violent crime has actually decreased, but they're still putting out these articles saying the opposite without fact backing it up. So I mean, what it comes down to is corporate interests. They've bought. I mean, look at who owns like these major media corporations. Like, of course, who's it going to support?
Let's talk about Portland, because you're in Portland, and it has been a hotbed for activism and protests, not just since George Floyd, but before then. Have you been active in those kind of demonstrations?
I feel like I should be careful what I say.
Okay. How about we say this? Do you think that what's happening in Portland and what has happened in Portland is good for Portland, or is it something that you would rather not happen?
Well, again, that depends on like who is Portland. Is it the people of Portland? Is it the houseless folks sleeping on the street in tents outside the Justice Center? Or is it the multinationals that are wanting to build another condo on an empty lot? Like, who is it good for? That's what it comes down to. You have to like break it down and look at who benefits from what, and I think it's not so much that the protest is good or bad for Portland. It's more that, it's people communicating what they feel. I'm sure you've heard the quote, a riot is the voice of the unheard, right? And I wouldn't even call what's happened in Portland riots. You'll see like people, I'm sure you've seen the shot where there's like a dozen photographers like crouched down taking a photo of like a little fire inside a trash can a riot would be like people actually fighting back against the police, and that just really doesn't happen. You know, police come in violently, you know, they'll set a curfew so they can declare it unlawful. They'll, you know, like they'll come up with reasons to break up any kind of social gathering, any kind of protest, and they'll declare it a riot, but they're the only ones being violent. You know, nobody's throwing bricks at cops. Nobody's getting in fistfights with cops. Like what's happening is cops are beating people up and then calling it a riot because people are resisting when they're like being choked and having their joints locked. Like it's ridiculous.
When I submit this to the Daily Beast and the Los Angeles Blade, I know what kind of story they'll want. But for Forbes, people will want to know, how do you support yourself? Is MMA a life? Can you earn a living off MMA, or do you do something else?
I mean, at this point, I think it's no secret that mixed martial arts fighters do not make a lot of money typically. I mean, even in like the biggest MMA organization out there, champions are still having to work day jobs. My income is mostly from my VA check, from my VA disability check through the VA for PTSD. Like that's the majority of my income. So, I mean, I got paid for this fight, but it wasn't.
How's that going in terms of getting help? Because
I mean, I see a therapist weekly.
But PTSD is serious shit.
Yeah. I mean, and I still have meltdowns in training. You know, the week before the fight, somebody had me in side control and I couldn't get up, and I started crying and freaking out, and you know, like, hey, let me up. And this was like a week before my fight. You know, and this is a common occurrence for me. So
sure.
So
plus COVID also delayed your fight, and that must have been a pain in the ass.
Yeah, definitely.
Because you're psyched, you know, you get your mindset, and then wait.
Yeah, you've got all the tension building up, and then everything falls apart, and you don't even know if it's going to happen. It was definitely stressful.
Wow. Let's get to the part everybody wants to know about. Tell me about this cat.
Lufa, my little brat. Yeah, she's.
How do you spell Lufa, by the way? Is that like L-O-F-A?
L-O-O-F-A. Maybe an H on the end. I don't know. However you spell, like the cleaning apparatus.
Lufa, yes. Lufa, yes.
Yeah, she's just a terrible little demon baby and a brat that tries to rule my life. And she's going to be really mad that her breakfast is late this morning.
I will get you to it. How did you come up with Lady Feral? How did that come about?
Well, I mean, I've been using the moniker Feral and variations of it online since probably like 2003, 2004.
Wow.
And part of that is like my upbringing. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of feral children, like basically kids that, you know, the whole raised by wolves thing, except like a serious thing, like feral children are often like neglected. Their language skills don't develop properly, their brains don't develop properly, and they're basically kind of in an animalistic state. And I kind of felt like that's kind of who I was growing up, except that the one thing that saved me was that I learned to read early. And but yeah, I'm a little wild, you know, and not in the like party sense, but like, I don't know, I get along really good with dogs and cats, and people not so much sometimes, you know. So I don't know.
It seems so bad.
A little bit of personal history for me, you know.
There's a movie, an old movie from before you were born, called Mad Max: The Road Warrior.
Yes.
And as a character, the feral kid.
Yeah, the kid with the boomerang.
Yes, and that's who you remind me of, actually.
I mean, that's pretty accurate. Pretty accurate.
At the end of every interview I do, I ask people, is there anything you were thinking I was going to ask? Anything you were prepared to talk about, but I didn't ask? Anything you want to make sure that our readers know about you or about anything?
Whew. You know, at this point, nothing really surprises me in terms of the questioning. It's usually more of a pleasant surprise than, well, I mean, okay, given our shared experiences, I'm glad that you're not like asking questions about my genitals or anything, because when it comes to trans folks, that's always like first and foremost. Right?
You know what my response is when someone asks me, either a reporter or a person on the street, can I ask you a question? Did you have the surgery? I always say, oh, before I answer, how is your last pap smear? Or
Yeah.
what's your prostate exam like? And they're like, well, that's very personal. I'm like, yeah.
Isn't it? Isn't it?
No, I wouldn't ask that question of you. And I personally don't really care, but it must be hard being this sort of Z-list, moving your way up celebrity and having to deal with a lot of cisgender reporters who really don't know what trans is. You're like doing trans 101 with them.
Yeah, well, and it's not just like media people, it's people in general, you know, and the well-meaning ones still often need trans 101. And you know, and that's being in the position that I'm in right now, sort of doing this whole you know, I represent the trans community thing, you know,
Oh
like
God, please no.
yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it's one of those things where like I feel obligated to sort of do that a little bit, and I'll always preface it. I'll be like, hey, you know, first off, these are not appropriate questions to ask any trans person you meet. I'm willing to have these conversations with you, but also don't feel like you can just ask any trans person this, you know. So that's an ongoing thing, you know.
We really are cut from the same cloth. I was told by someone that Caitlyn Jenner was on The View today as a co-host. And when I think of someone who's a spokesperson for the trans community, I immediately think not Caitlyn Jenner, but she wants to be. And
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw her name at you and say, Caitlyn Jenner, thoughts?
Like, no, I mean, honestly, Caitlyn Jenner is not representative of the vast majority of the trans community. You know, she comes from a very privileged background.
Mhm.
Uh, she has money. She's been famous for decades.
Yep.
You know, and
Conservative.
yeah, the conservative thing, like I will never understand the trans people that I call pick-me's that really think they really seem to think that like if they hate their own community enough, if they hate themselves enough, that the normal people will I don't know. I don't know what they're hoping for. That they'll be the last ones exterminated in the camps. Like I don't understand it. I just do not
Pick me, like in
understand.
Pickme. Pick me.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. That's a great one. I love that. I'm going to steal that and give you credit for it.
Yeah. I mean, it
Um,
it's the whole idea of like what are they trying to be like the capo in the concentration camp or what? Like
mhm.
no amount of hating yourself is going to make these people love you.
Right. Right. This has been a great conversation. I got to interview Caitlyn at her home in Malibu above the clouds. And the question that was famous was she wanted to be Ted Cruz's trans ambassador. But the question I loved was I asked her, don't you regret exposing your children to cameras and TV shows and reality and basically turning their lives upside down? She said, absolutely not. I've made them all billionaires. It's the best thing that ever happened to them. And I'm thinking, your soul is definitely lost. On the other hand, Alana, you have a great future because you've got a noggin up here that nobody's been able to knock off. So
Yeah.
keep keep going,
Celine
keep thinking
certainly
what you're
tried.
thinking. I'm so glad to have met you over the electronic way, and hopefully one day we'll find each other in real life. So best of luck to you, and thanks for taking the time today. I'm so